Thank you, Althea, and thank you to all of you for joining us on such a beautiful evening outside. And yes, Fairbanks is a wonderful place to be, and I'm glad to be here. I'm very proud to be the fire chief at UAF. It's where my career got its start, and I'm just so pleased to be involved in the future careers of many other firefighters and paramedics who graduate from here and then go on to have successful careers across the country and beyond. So thank you for being here. Tonight, as you can see from the title slide, we're going to talk about fire prevention. This is, after all, fire season. And one of my observations over the years is that Fairbanksans are they do very well in periods of high fire danger. I've observed that when the fire danger is highest, people are very careful, and we have few human-caused fires. So that's a very good thing. What I want to talk about tonight is basically I'm going to begin by discussing the fire problem that we face here, that we experience. And then I want to talk about two excellent programs and the way they might work together. And these are programs of the National Fire Protection Association and the International Association of Fire Chiefs that I'm involved with. And by the time we're done, we will hopefully have a pretty good understanding about things that you can do so that we don't feel helpless to the ravages of wildfire. So, as Althea said, my name's Doug Schrage, and here we are with UAF summer sessions. So let's see here. So let's start by talking about the actual fire problem. What we're looking at here is not an unusual home that you would find in the interior. This is an interior home, and there's a reason that many of us like to live here. One of the allures of living in Fairbanks, in Alaska, and in Fairbanks in particular, is the opportunity to be close to nature, to connect to the wildland, to be in the woods, to feel part of your natural surroundings. And so this is the way many of us construct our homes. Trees and vegetation, natural vegetation, they're beautiful, and we want to surround our homes with them. They provide privacy from our neighbors, they reduce road noise, and there's no shame in wanting to have your home in the woods. We call this the wildland urban interface zone, or sometimes we just call it the zone. So the wildland urban interface zone is the place where homes and residences intertwine with the natural environment. And what we've learned over the last 20 years or so of really having escalating fire seasons in Alaska and throughout the country, particularly in the West, is that interface fires, or wildland urban interface zone fires, are different from house fires, and they're different from wildland fires. We have a very good understanding about fire behavior in structures. Structural firefighters, municipal firefighters, they have a very solid understanding. We have a good amount of literature and background and data all turned into practice that help us to understand how fire will behave and move through a structure under various conditions. And the wildfire community similarly has a very good understanding about how wildfires are ignited, how they propagate, how they move through the wildland. But we're more recently beginning to understand that there's a difference in the wildland interface zone. Because the homes themselves, the buildings in the zone, add a unique kind of fuel to the wildland fire that's existing. And so we've learned to approach zone fires differently than we do strictly a wildland fire. And those are some of the things that I want to talk about. So here's a home that's in the interface zone. You can see some trees in the back, and the place is on fire. And it's a very intense fire. This is a very intense fire. And this intense fire will add heat and contribute fuel to the surrounding fuel, and just have the effect of causing the fire to grow more rapidly. Fire is a natural process. I don't want to suggest that it's not good. There are many wildland fires that are ignited intentionally to help manage the natural environment. And of course, we use heat, fire, and combustion for many useful purposes. What tonight's presentation is really about is preparation. And here's a quote from my friend and colleague, somebody that you may know or have heard of, Joe Stamm. He's retired Chief of Fire and Aviation with the Alaska Division of Forestry. And he said that in order to be ready when needed, you also must be ready when it's not needed. So in other words, you can't wait until the fire front is approaching your subdivision or your home to begin getting prepared. The time to get prepared is really now, and all the time ahead of the fire season. And so that is the theme for really the rest of everything else that we're going to discuss tonight. Alaska's fire season is unique from the rest of the country because ours occurs later in the year. Or correction, it's the other way around. Ours occurs first, and so many times what happens is our fire season has been getting earlier and earlier every year, but typically we start ramping up around April 15th. And that's when we start having our training, that's when we start getting our renewals, safety training, and that's when the fires begin. Because it's before green up, which is when the fuels are more combustible. And when the fires really start developing, the firefighters from the states, the teams from the states will come north and help us because it enables them to gain some early season experience. And then as our fire season is winding down, the fire season down in the States is really starting to ramp up. So we send our firefighters often down to the States in July and August and sometimes September. 2016, last year, was a pretty mild year as far as wildfires go in Alaska. But in the in 6 of the recent years, the 6 high years, we've burned more than 5 million acres in Alaska. 2015 was the second highest, just 2 years ago was the second highest in recorded history in Alaska for the number of acres consumed. Can anybody guess what the highest year was? Probably many of you were right in the middle of it.
2004?
2004, precisely. 2004 was the worst fire season in history. And if you remember the smoke that was here, I was living in Anchorage at the time, but we sent teams and crews to the interior to help fight some of the fires that were going on. Most fires in Alaska, the vast majority of fires in Alaska are started first by lightning, or second, a very close second, by human-caused causes. And last year in 2016, there were, like I said, it was a mild year, but right here in the interior, we had 52 reported fires that were suppressed that consumed about 4,400 acres. This image that you see on the slide there is an excerpt from CNBC website from 2015, and this was a fire a picture down in South Central, and many of you remember that fire season. So here we are, fast forward to the current year, it's 2017, and the predictive services that we rely on for fire planning earlier this year predicted that 2017 would present significant major wildfire potential. But the one thing I would say about that is not unusual. We expect significant potential. That's a normal conclusion for the interior. So far, there have been 56 fires in the state, 9 of them in the interior. And in fact, 6 of them in the interior going on right now were human caused. 6 of the 9 were human caused, including the big one, which is the Robertson fire down in Tok near Dot Lake. Had let's see, I had the number written down, but I've forgotten it. But it's the biggest fire, and we have fires from out of state helping with that one. Now, after the rain we had over the last couple of days, they put that fire into monitor status, and they've redeployed many of those firefighters to other fires. But that was the big show a couple of days ago. This picture is actually the fire that was going on earlier this week and over the weekend. So far in 2017 across the state, 198 fires and 126,000 acres consumed so far. So let's talk about being fire-wise. And let me just say, please feel free to interrupt me if you have questions or observations that you'd like to. We'll have question and answer time at the end, but I also welcome you to raise your questions when it's relevant. So wildland firefighters commonly, they understand very well that there are 3 factors that determine wildland fire behavior: weather, topography, and fuel. Let's start with a discussion about topography. Topography is the lay of the land. If your home is situated on a hillside, generally, it's more vulnerable to an advancing wildfire than one that isn't. Topography considers other things, such as aspect. If you're on a northern aspect, you generally are going to be in the shade more times of the year than if you're on a southern aspect. If you're on an eastern aspect, you're more likely to have warmth and sunshine in the earlier parts of the day, and if you're on a western aspect, in the later parts of the day. If you live on the side of a valley that faces the other side of the valley, and if they're relatively close, like in a canyon, then that's a different kind of topography that can affect fire behavior, because the heat from fire can be reflected across the valley and warm up the air between. Weather is probably the biggest factor in determining wildfire growth potential and spread. Weather, of course, is things such as the relative humidity, the temperature, but most importantly, the biggest factor is the wind. And wind has a bearing on temperature and humidity as well. For example, this weekend, we expect that the relative humidity in Fairbanks is going to drop to as low as 15%, which, even though it's going to be cooler tonight, it creates conditions that are ripe for a wildfire to ignite and spread, because it's the dryness of the fine fuels, grasses, leaves, small tinder, where the wildfires often start and get a head start on us. And then finally, the third factor, as you can see here, is the fuel. The fuel is the combustible materials in the wildland, such as, of course, trees, shrubs, brush, deadfall, ground litter, plants, mulch, and perhaps most relevant to this conversation, the homes and structures that we live in. Because you see, the homes are part of the fuel equation in the wildland interface zone. And of these 3 things, weather, topography, and fuel, fuel is the only one that we can reliably influence. And so it's the fuel that we focus our prevention efforts on. So being fire-wise means making our homes more resistant to ignition. This image is the Card Street fire last year down on the Kenai Peninsula. And what we see here is a home that is thriving with bright green foliage around it. And then beyond that, it's surrounded by scorched, burned natural fuels. So besides the fuel, what this home has is a good defensible space. In the area that we call the home ignition zone, the area that's close to the home, usually within 5 feet of the home, within this wildland-urban interface zone. This house was successfully defended against the Card Street fire because the homeowner took deliberate efforts to prepare and make this home ready to survive an advancing fire front. So that's what being firewise is developing defensible space. And the truth is, firefighting resources are very limited. When a fast-moving wildfire is approaching, there typically aren't enough firefighters, there aren't enough vehicles, there aren't enough tools, and there isn't enough water or aircraft to suppress the fire completely. That's why these wildland fires go on for a long time, is because they have to slowly build lines around it. And so when a fire involves the interface zone, the firefighters have to make choices about where they're going to invest their efforts, where they're going to deploy their resources. And the main decision criterion for whether a home can be protected is the defensible space and the amount of preparation that the homeowner has taken in advance. So if the firefighters have to choose between two homes, half a block apart, and one home looks like this, and one home is cluttered with deadfall, fallen trees, tall grass, firewood, propane tanks, vehicles, combustible roof, the firefighters are going to choose where to take a stand, and they're going to take a stand on the one that they're going to have the highest amount of success at. So that's sort of an ugly truth of wild interface zone firefighting. And so that's really why this is so important. Here's a bit of published material which helps us to, this is what creating defensible space means. And these are things that you can easily do. Some of these things are things that you don't want to do, such as cut down trees. But there are ways to do it that still preserves the natural beauty. It still provides the shielding and the cover that we desire. And here are some examples of things that you can do. And we begin by your house, which is the largest source of fuel in the interface zone. You can make your home more resistant to ignition. For example, a sheet metal roof is obviously less combustible and less likely to transfer heat into your home or catch fire than a wood shake roof or roofs made of other materials, such as exposed tar paper. Keeping your chimney cleaned. Things such as, when given the choice, install tempered windows or multiple pane windows, which I think we all probably do. And then removing combustibles from the parts of your home. So, for example, it wouldn't be uncommon to drive around and see firewood stacked on the front porch of a home or under the deck. And that's a poor practice. It's convenient for us, but it's not a good practice because embers can get trapped in there. A big, fast-moving wildfire creates its own weather, and it can deposit embers very long distances ahead of the fire, in front of the fire, and these are called spot fires. And it's these small embers that can get trapped in leaves that have accumulated in your gutters. They can go into the vents on the gable ends of your home. They can go under your porch and into the wooden lattice. they can get into your wood pile and very easily start a fire there. It's these spot fires or these hot embers that move ahead of firefighters that results in firefighters becoming trapped and killed because the fire leapfrogs ahead of them and now they're surrounded. And so you can make your home more resistant. The zone within 30 feet of your home is the defensible space. And let me back up just a bit. Part of preparing your home is then also removing all vegetation within 3 feet of the foundation. And that means raking away mulch and leaves and plants. You can have a flower garden or a rock garden. Those things are fine. But what you want to do is you want to prevent a place for a creeping fire or a flying ember to land and have a place to settle up against your house and start it on fire. So back now to the defensive space, the defensive zone. Yes, yes, sir. I'm sorry.
That 3-foot no vegetation also include well-mowed lawns?
Well, no, not practically speaking. If your lawn is well mowed and irrigated, it doesn't really present a problem. But if you have if it's very dry, and the grass has died or has turned brown, that can be a problem. So it sort of depends on your ability to maintain it. So dead grass certainly you would want to remove. The storage shed, wood piles, propane tanks, fuel tanks, and I realize it's probably not practical to move them in every case, but the more of these things that you can move outside of that 30-foot buffer, the more likely you are to survive. Your home is more likely to survive the fire.
What about buried fuel?
What's that?
If the fuel tank is buried, does it matter still?
Oh, the fuel tank? Underground? No, that's fine. That's not a hazard at all. An underground fuel tank is no problem at all. Outside this 30-foot zone is where you would do your burn barrels or your warming fires, your recreational fires, things like that. The more that you can plant deciduous trees within that 30-foot space and move the coniferous trees out, the safer you will be. So you want the spruce trees to be basically outside that 30-foot zone as much as possible, and let the birch trees or the aspen grow up closer to your home if you want that cover. We're going to talk more about vegetation in a little bit. From that space beyond 30 feet, you also want to trim all the branches up to 10 feet from within 10 feet of the ground. And the reason is these are called ladder fuels. So sometimes a fire you'll have a slow-moving creeping fire that's traveling across the ground, and it doesn't present a great danger. But when it reaches a spruce tree, for example, that has branches that are touching the ground, especially dead branches, those are ladder fuels that will bring the fire up into the tree. Once it gets into the trees and the canopies, then it will leap from treetop to treetop and spread much faster, and now you've got a real problem. So we try to thin these trees out and then trim the brush up to within 10 feet of the ground. And then other things that help make the job easier for the firefighters. So for example, making sure that your driveway can support a fire truck. Making sure, if it's possible, that you have a turnaround. The firefighters like to back in when they're taking a stand on a wildland fire or an interface zone fire. They want to back in so that if they have to retreat, they can do it quickly without running over their own hoses. You want to make sure that your address is clearly marked so that they know where they're at, and so that they can report their location, and so that they can find your location if necessary. And on that note, I would like to say so the North Star Borough has been for several years undergoing a pretty they've been dealing with addressing problems all across the borough. as they're able to get to them, they are approaching homeowners and saying, we need to change your address. Because your driveway is on Black Street, but your address is on Blue Street. And there are lots of these examples across the borough. They're correcting them. They have a good inventory of where they exist. And as they're able to, they're approaching homeowners and requiring them to change their address. But it can be a real problem, especially as subdivisions are created, lots are combined, ad hoc driveways are put in. Sometimes the way that you get to a home is not the same way that it would be reported. And so if you're so inclined, if you're moved to do so, I would suggest that if you have any doubt about it for your home, that you contact the borough and offer to get on that, to have them correct your address sooner rather than later. It's controversial. Nobody wants to change their address when they lived on the same street for their entire lifetimes, for example. But it's a necessity in our opinion. So we talked just a little bit about irrigation. Irrigation has a lot to do with creating and preserving this defensible space. And so if you can keep your lawn mowed to 3 inches or so and keep it watered, it's less likely to contribute to the fuel load around your home. Wood chips, a lot of people like to use wood chips or bark for landscaping. You want to minimize that practice, especially close to your home. There are other alternatives. Rock gardens are very popular. Keep your gutters cleaned out. And then if you live on a slope, if you live on a hillside, then all of these zones are going to increase in size, up to 100 feet. So if you live on a slope, remember we talked about topography, a hillside contributes to fire spread in magnitude similar to the wind or the weather. And so if you live on a slope, then you want to extend the 30-foot measures out to 100 feet if possible. Recognizing, of course, it's not always possible or practical. So many fire departments will conduct courtesy home inspections. They'll come to your home and they'll give you an assessment as to how fire-wise your home is. So this top left picture is some firefighters down in Anchorage that I know who are doing a home assessment. They got their tape measure out, and they're going to make recommendations about what to do with this tree, it looks like. This next image down here on the right is you can see that the homeowner has cleared out. They've thinned out the number of trees. They've brushed them up 10 feet up the trunk. They've removed all the ladder fuels. And the vegetation is trimmed and cut low. So this is a good example of fire-wise. So we don't have a formal program in the interior, but any of the fire departments, I can't obviously speak for all of them because we're different organizations, but I'm quite certain that if you called the fire department and said you'd like them to come and do a fire-wise assessment, they would enthusiastically agree. And if they don't want to, then tell them to call me and we'll come out and help you with it. Here's a couple of other very positive fire-wise examples. You can see here's an example of somebody cleaning the litter, dead leaves out of their gutter. So that's a picture that I grabbed off the internet. I have no idea where that one's at. Most of the other pictures that I've shown you are from Alaska and mostly in the interior, but the leaves one is one that is not. You can see this homeowner where the canoe is under the deck. That's they've moved the vegetation away from the foundation. There's 3 feet of rock, and not a lot of debris and litter that has accumulated under there. This other home, same thing. They've removed the combustibles other than the railroad ties from within 3 feet of their home. This is what most of the rest of the homes look like. Putting the firewood under your deck is a very convenient place to do it because it's out of the weather, it gets to air out, you don't have to go far to get it when you need to bring the wood in. But it obviously causes a fire problem because it contributes an enormous amount of fire load. If the fire is approaching your home and the firefighters choose to make a stand, they're going to do some of these following things. First of all, they're going to, let me back up. And if you agonized about cutting down trees around your house, if they decide to make a stand on your home, they're going to cut the trees down for you. So why not do it ahead of time and replace them so that you have a say in it, so that you have some control in what your landscaping looks like. They're going to come in, they're going to cut down trees, they're going to scatter your firewood pile. They're going to just take it and they're just going to start chucking pieces of firewood in every direction until the pile is spread out and low. Because they want to minimize the places where the embers can get stuck in there and start a fire. This wood pile under that deck, that's going to take them 20 minutes to probably scatter that. And 20 minutes is a lot of time in the face of an advancing fire front. They're going to cut down trees, they're going to remove combustibles, they're going to take your propane tanks, they're going to move them, they're going to take your lawnmowers with the gasoline in them and push them way off away. They're going to they're going to break into your home and they're going to close your curtains and try to prevent radiant heat from coming through the windows. They're going to do all the things that they can do to take a stand and prepare your home. The more of these things that you can do for yourself ahead of time, the safer or the more likely that it will be that when it's all said and done, you'll come home to a house that looks like that one in the picture in the Card Street fire. Okay, so that's a little bit about making your home fire-wise. The second program I want to talk about is called Ready, Set, Go. And this is a program that is promoted by the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and it dovetails very nicely with being fire-wise. Fire-wise is part of the readiness portion of Ready, Set, Go. Ready, Set, Go involves obviously three components. First of all, advanced preparation. Getting your home ready involves becoming fire-wise using some of the strategies and techniques that we've been talking about so far. Putting together an emergency go kit, a travel kit. Making plans in advance. Knowing in advance who you're going to contact by phone or cell or text so that you can communicate your intentions to people. Having your home, the address clearly marked. Having your escape routes planned. Signing up for example, with the Fairbanks Police Department or the Fairbanks North Star Borough for nixle alerts so that you can get up-to-date notifications of fire activity. And then working together with your neighbors to form a fire-wise community plan. In Alaska, state law allows for firefighters and law enforcement personnel to forcefully evacuate people from their homes. But it is a long-standing practice of both of those types of organizations not to do that. Nobody wants to force you from your home, and the police are not going to do it. The firefighters certainly are not going to do it. They may knock on your door and say, the fire is going to be here in 30 minutes. We want you to leave. And when you say, no, I think I'm going to stay here and stick it out, they may ask you for your next of kin and things like that to try to persuade you to move. But they're not going to force you from your home. If you leave, they may prevent you from coming back. But the police are not going to force you from your home in Alaska. The problem is what happens is people say, I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to stay in my home. I'm going to protect it. We've been through this before, and the fire never came. But what happens is when the decision is made to finally go, sometimes it's too late. And so being ready and then getting set and then going, this program is about thinking about this in advance and making the advanced preparation so that we're not telling you that you have to go, But if you're going to go, we want you to do it smartly, and we want you to do it with proper preparations in place. That's what we're talking about. The second phase of Ready, Set, Go is getting set. So getting set means preparing your home. Getting, you saw in the earlier image, having a garden hose, having garden hoses attached to your hose bibs. If you have a portable pump like the one you see there, the firefighters use what's called a Mark III fire pump. If you have one and you've got a stream or a lake or a slough nearby, and if you're going to leave, if you set that pump up, the firefighters are going to use it because that saves them the time and the effort and the distraction of having to set up their own pump. If there's a pump available, they're going to use it. This picture in the top right, that's a roof sprinkler that firefighters will deploy. If they may set it up and hook it up to a hose and set that on your roof, and it will spread water cascading across your roof and prevent embers from starting a fire there. Preparing your home means doing things like preparing to close your curtains to keep the radiant heat out, covering up exposed vents, like if you have a fresh air vent or an attic vent, stuff it with fiberglass insulation or something that is not combustible, to prevent embers from getting inside your house, and moving last-minute lawn furniture, deck furniture. You know, you might have a barbecue grill with a propane cylinder on the deck. Move it away. Do things like this. Is getting ready in case you decide to leave. It means being packed and loaded, having your car fueled up, having your emergency go kit and your supplies in the car. And it means maintaining situational awareness. In other words, monitoring the news, monitoring the radio, monitoring alerts, communicating with your neighbors, get on the internet and monitor the latest fire status, and be informed so that if you decide to make your retreat, you know when to do it. An emergency go kit can include things such as what's depicted here: blankets, sleeping bags, medication, spare clothes, toilet paper, cash, duct tape, radios, batteries, flashlight, and so forth. And then the third phase of Ready, Set, Go is to go. And if you're going to go, decide to go early. Don't wait too long. This picture in the lower left is the McHugh Creek fire down in South Central. And you can see there are literally thousands of vehicles all trying to get along this highway. Now, the truth be told, they're not trying to escape the fire. They're trying to get to the Kenai Peninsula. But this illustrates the sort of traffic problems that you would face in the event of an approaching wildfire. It's important to plan your routes in advance. And when I say routes, I mean plural. You want to have two ways out. You need to know of two ways to get away. So it might be Chena Hot Springs Road and Nordale Road. It might be Farmers Loop east or west. Whatever it is, especially if you live on a hillside. The fire code requires that if you live in a subdivision with more than 30 homes, that the subdivision has to have two ways in and out. Now, first of all, we don't enforce the fire code in the interior. And so that is loosely enforced, if enforced at all. And secondly, in some cases, it's simply not practical. But these are things for you to think about in advance. And this other picture that we see here, this is also in South Central. This is, I believe, the Sockeye fire, which was 2 years ago. Or maybe it was last year. And then follow your plan. Know your routes and follow your plan. So your plan might be to drive to a friend's home, drive to a relative's home, drive to a borough-established shelter. Whatever your plan is, follow your plan. Because that's what the people that you communicate with are going to be expecting you to do. unfortunately, this is a picture not from Alaska, but this is, I've seen images like this many times. Not, again, not in Alaska, but it could happen here, where you have lots of vehicles trying to leave a city or a community, and the traffic is stopped. And sometimes it's stopped because there's so much traffic that they can't move. Sometimes it's stopped because one or two drivers panicked and abandoned their car in the middle of the road. Honest to goodness, that happens. And there are lots of horrific stories about people who have perished in situations just like this. And so when we say go early, this is what we're trying to avoid right here. So ready, set, go means advanced preparations, including firewise, getting set, getting loaded up, knowing your plan, and then going means making your escape. So that concludes my presentation. And what I'd like to do is really get into the questions now. And I have a few resources here that we'll talk about also. So do you have any questions, observations, or experiences that you would like to share? Yes, ma'am.
When I was in Australia, there would be signs around that talked about the year of a fire, how much burned and how many people died. On every sign, how many people died. Most of them, they said, often were depending on homes.
Well, Australia is known for having some horrific wildfires because of the intense heat and the dry weather and the nature of the vegetation there. And yeah, many people have perished in fires. So I guess that's kind of like putting the roadside tributes that say, that show that somebody died here. So it paints a picture. It makes it real when you can see how many people die from a wildfire. I did a case study when I was going to the National Fire Academy on the one of the Oakland, California fires, which of course Oakland burns every year. It seems, because of the Santa Ana winds, and one of the quotes from one of the incident commanders during the fire during that year was, "It's hard to get organized when you're running for your life." And this was the fire commander trying to set up and take control of the situation. The fire moved so quickly there because of the eucalyptus trees and things like that. We don't have eucalyptus trees, but we do have black spruce, and we have really any kind of spruce can really contribute to a fire problem. We do get some dynamic fire behavior here. But I'd like to kind of end with the same thought I started with. I'm grateful and appreciative that Fairbanksans seem to take their fire safety pretty seriously. And I think Althea had a question.
Actually, I've got a question of my own and another question here. Would straw bale homes in Alaska be unwise to build?
Well, and the question is, would straw bale homes be unwise to build? And I'm going to say no, not unwise. So some people do build homes from straw bales because it's great insulation, it's inexpensive, and abundant. And so the problem, any home can burn. Any building can burn. I mean, even this one, which is what we would call a non-combustible building, it has combustible furnishings in it. But making your home resistant to ignition during a wildfire means reducing the opportunities for embers to get going. And so if you have a straw bale home, you don't leave the straw exposed. You have it covered with the same siding or outer material that any home would be covered with, I understand. Is that right? You can't leave it. You can't leave the straw exposed to the elements. So there would be some siding or some coverage on there. And that same siding that protects any typical home would also protect a straw bale home.
And the question that I had was, you said 6 out of the 9 fires current were human started. Is it barbecues? Is it cigarettes? What's the cost of those things?
I don't have access to the information to that level of detail, but I do know that human-caused fires includes such things as campfires, children, debris burning, equipment, hot equipment, such as chainsaws, incendiary, which means basically intentionally set fires, railroads, and discarded smoking materials. So the human-caused fires could have been any one of those or any combination of those. I don't know. It would be easy for me to find out, though. So I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
Since you spent some time in Anchorage, and I have friends on Hillside, have they ever done anything for the fire, getting Hillside area evacuated?
You know, it's funny. I had a conversation with the Fairbanks fire management officer just today about that very thing. So the question was, since she has friends and relatives that live in Anchorage, they have a very real fire problem on the Anchorage hillside because they have a lot of very high-end real estate with in the wildland-urban interface zone with very narrow, some places narrow roads and only one way in and out. So it's a recipe for disaster, and it'll probably happen someday. So the question is have they done anything to address the problem and provide for evacuation? And the answer is yes, but probably not enough. So I was talking to the Fairbanks FMO fire management officer who participated in an exercise in Anchorage just earlier this month. And they pulled out the evacuation plan and found that they did have a plan, but it was out of date and needed to be updated. So that part is not really, they have some work to do. But they have put a lot of money into building fire breaks, to thinning vegetation on properties that are either publicly owned or ones that homeowners have granted access to. And they have a very good program there where people can, they have wood lots, basically places where people can bring their brush and leaves and branches and stuff to a woodlot and deposit it for free without having to pay to take it to the dump. Now, of course, here we would all just take it to the dumpster site and deposit it there. But in Anchorage, they would have to pay to do that. So they have these free lots to encourage people to clear their lots. So there's more work to be done. Yes, sir.
It would seem that a good evacuation spot for the interior would be downtown Fairbanks. That's pretty fire defensible, not any trees.
Yeah, the official borough evacuation points are, or rallying points, congregation points are, first of all, the Carlson Center, and then the secondly would be the ice arena on Pegger. Or not on Pegger, on, what's the name of it? The Big Dipper, yes. So the two ice arenas are basically the places where they would ask us to go. We have a pretty robust evacuation plan in the borough, so I'm very proud. I wasn't directly involved in developing it, but I'm very happy to say that we have a pretty good plan here. We do need to exercise it, though. Yes, ma'am.
Still think about Haystack. What was that, 3 years ago when we had the fires out by Haystack on the Elliott?
Mm-hmm.
Coming towards like Goldstream and Farmers Loop. Were you here? Maybe it was longer ago.
No, I was here for the Haystack fire. I didn't participate in it personally.
I know people got like they're ready, set, go. You know, got their cars ready to go if they had to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's good. So you're helping to reinforce the point that the people here generally are pretty well attuned to the fire danger and generally approach it pretty smartly. Althea.
But I do think we've also got that sector. I remember on that fire, when they were going around door to door, they found doors that they didn't know. There were homes that weren't registered anywhere. And that's the type of people that we have in Alaska.
Yeah.
And they're the first
Leave
ones
me
that
alone.
they were the first ones that called the congressional office to complain.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Down Dortmund, I live at the end of it. We've got trees right next to the buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, these buildings were built in '82, a lot of 82 and '88. But the trees is there and the people don't want to do it. I know I've got it there up at the back. I
Mhm.
bought me a set of them chain ladders,
Ladder.
go over the side, come off the ship
Yeah.
and get out of there. And I'm on the 3rd floor. We don't have an elevator, just one set of stairs. So you're hung up there if it ever does get started over there in that area. And every time I drive up and down there, I'm looking at those houses, the condos that's on the left side, going back toward Chena Pump. Well, they're right up, I mean, they just solid. And
trees
black
are right.
spruce up against the houses and everything. You know, and that's, they just caught fire from a lawnmower out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way in heaven you'd ever fly out the top of that.
So for those who are viewing this recording later and for those who are watching it at a distance, the gentleman was just pointing out a couple of examples of properties where there are, it's a condominium complex with trees that are right against the building. And so what I would say to that is, you don't have to look very far at all. I mean, even in downtown Fairbanks, there are many, many examples, they abound, where those sorts of situations exist. The general rule with trees is to thin them and move them beyond that 30-foot buffer. If they're the, like for example, the spruce trees, you can have the deciduous trees and other trees that are more resistant to fire closer, but you still don't want the branches within 10 feet of the siding. So 10 feet is the general rule there. And you can still have plants around, but you try to use plants that have a high water content and a thin sap. They're very watery.
We've got a high concentration of tree hug.
High concentration of what?
Tree hug.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
If we thought about cutting it down and just allowing trees up to 15 feet,
They go into a
they
panic.
won't go over the roof and stay down a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's part of the reason, yeah.
They kill the tree.
That is the nature of the problem.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I have here a few resources, and I'm not going to ask you to write those down. I'll tell you what they are, but I'll tell you how you can get them. There's a couple of ways we can do this. You can either take some notes about what to search for. I can also, if you want to put your email address on the list, I can email you this presentation that I made. But this first one is a very good, it's a vegetation guide, and this was produced right here in Alaska. And it's a Firewise vegetation guide, and it has a lot of information about what sort of plants to use and what not to use, and a lot of information about the vegetation and landscaping. And the second one is the Alaska Firewise website. You could simply Google Alaska Firewise. And then the third resource is the Ready, Set, Go website. So you can Google Ready, Set, Go, or you can just copy down this URL. And a lot of information there. I also welcome you to contact me, and I'd be available to answer your questions. And if possible, if you're within our service area, we'll come and do a home assessment. And it's been my very distinct pleasure to stand before you tonight and talk about one of my favorite topics. And I think we have one last question.
A friend of mine works for the BLM Fire Service.
Yes.
He said that the spruce trees were like standing torches. And they used to say that birch trees were fire break, but now they're backing off on that and they're more susceptible to fire than they were as we dry out or something. I'm not sure what exactly, but he was saying birch trees aren't fire break.
The question was had to do with acknowledging that the spruce trees are very combustible, and that the prevailing thought used to be that the birch trees were more resistant to fire, and that's still true. but less so than they might be. And that's, I think, because it's becoming more common that the birch trees are becoming infested or diseased and more susceptible to fire. I'm not an expert in that particular area, but that is my understanding.
All right, wonderful.
Okay, thank you,
Let's give it a
Anthony.
round of applause. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.